one layer deeper on this, and I want to go back to thinking about the outcomes of storytelling in this new world. But on this barrier piece, it does pricing. Listen, you're hitting on it in generic terms, but there really is the very specific question is, how much more will you pay for a non-standard ad, right? I mean, that is the expectation is if there are less.
It's how much more will you pay for impact?
Yeah.
I mean, non-standard.
I like that.
Cares?
That was good.
Right.
That was good. Right, but that is not how companies are yet enabled, right? I mean, it goes back to this issue, and so I guess that's the bridge, right? If you are creating these new things and recognizing there's new data to be able to articulate the fact that there's more bang for your buck, but we have procurement on the other side that doesn't maybe understand that. In the middle is the transaction, I'm guessing, is very much around the friction of, is that a 10% increase? Is that 50% increase? Right? I mean, and is there a willingness, I guess, from the buy side? Are you willing to pay more for impact, as Pooja says? And how do you justify it?
I guess since I'm the buyer.
You guys all spend money, but it's actually your money. They help you spend it, but yes.
So I think yes, but I think it's, obviously you have to do, it's difficult because sometimes you don't always know what the outcome is going to be. So you have to find a way to kind of, how do you project what that's going to be? How do you kind of estimate that? And then, what within each campaign or within each kind of percentage of always on, what amount of that is going to be something that you're going to be testing? And then for us, we have this kind of internal joke that right now we have more tests than American Airlines, or more pilots than American Airlines. And I think the thing is that once you take the results from that, how do you actually start to scale that? Because I think that's when you can start to, kind of advance the financial discussion. Once you're able to show that impact across, in the case of Nissan, across all of our models, across all of our markets, that's a very powerful discussion to have.
That's great. That's a really important step of not just test and learn, but what's your activation plan?
Exactly.
So as you're presenting a learning roadmap, you actually can see if this works, we're going to scale immediately. We're not going to wait and have another committee meeting. It's not going to be 3 months later when we're into campaign, but turn it on a dime and then roll on to the next test.
Cool. So let's talk a little about some of what these the outputs of this world of better, more customized storytelling, right? Quite clearly there's a focus on personalization is a word that we can often put in there. We use the word engagement a lot. I guess maybe just I'd love to hear some of what you guys are doing in maybe a more practical sense. What's some of the more customized non-standard stories you guys are telling? Is it about, again, make and model? Is it about pricing and promotion? As you guys work with your clients or as you work on behalf of your brands, tell us about some of the stories you're trying. How are you, what are you seeing that's interesting? What's working? What's not so far?
I think for us, it's making sure that we're having kind of segment-specific discussions. So again, back to the point of if somebody is in market for a sedan, let's serve them up content that is relevant for that. Let's not show them an SUV or a van or something that they're not even interested in. So there's that piece of it, and I think the other thing that we're trying to get into is actually taking some of that behavioral data. So how can you use dynamic creative optimization? How can you start to bring in some of the things that we know what they're interested in and do it in a way that's relevant, not creepy, but make sure that it's relevant for them. So we're playing both in segment, in market, not in market, and then how can we incorporate more behavioral type data into that messaging as well?
That's great. Yeah, same. Much more focus on DCO. And looking actually as we develop things, like one approach we're taking at Wavemaker is to develop what we call mod docs, which is why don't you start first with the idea in this documentary format for one client of a design for long form and every iteration of that at the same time at the onset, instead of taking it as a long form, cut down, slice down after the fact. Instead, understand what the platform distribution is, what the characteristics, what the behaviors are, and design that all within one format and one brief.
I think it also reflects a need to work differently, and I think that if you think of the world of media that I'm a part of now, people think of traditional building of the media plan, and then storytelling is relegated to the creative agencies. There's a gap in between, which is story building, and I think it's amazing what happens when you get tight teams sitting together, working together from the onset, as opposed to the traditional iterative process where sometimes media comes in late in the game. I mean, creative is media, media is creative, and more, I think, like what we're doing on Nissan with TBWA and OMD, literally, welded together at the hip, working on which types of data will better inform the right kinds of storytelling. We call it story building, where we think ahead to cultural moments, and what we do is we take demographic data and we take other inputs to build these stories, collecting assets in advance so that we can pivot in real time to communicate the right story to the right people in the when they're in the right kind of mood.
Yeah. And I think it even and that goes back to the planning stage, because there's so much information and insight that comes from media measurement and behavior and how our consumers are actually behaving with your different type of ad formats, content. And so that actually we're trying to shift. There is obviously still a really important role for traditional brand strategy, but also this media insights needs to be feeding into that as well, because that's when you're going to get the intersection point between the two.
Yeah, starting whole new structures within, right? You need those people sitting together in the same location, having that fluidity.
Yep.
And I find the creative agencies are really leaning into data finally too.
Definitely.
We've seen that from that transition.
Some even move from creative into media.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's crazy how that happens, right?
Cats and dogs, everybody living together.
The world is happy.
Go ahead, Pusha, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's indicative of some of the work we've even done with Nissan. You know, we do real-time creative optimization, you know, as we're doing real-time brand lift measurement. So we've launched with, you know, one version of an engagement, and then as we see the data coming back, we're able to actually build, you know, with, you know, Nissan and its agency, a more elaborate version, or a version that's actually lets you go deeper or lets us hone in on what we see really lifting. And just being able to do that, because you've got all parties, you know, involved and working together in real time is pretty powerful.
Does anyone buy the argument that I still hear sometimes that for big mass brands that actually creative personalization isn't actually all that necessary? Does anyone, you know, I still hear that from time to time, that listen, if you're insert, you know, big, you know, the iconic consumer brands that we all think about, I won't name any to just let the imagination go wild, I will still get in the argument sometimes of, you know what, at the end of the day, they need to reach everybody. And so how much content personalization is really going to help? Anyone buying that?
I think that, I mean, one of the things that we've seen across the, you know, tens of thousands of engagements we've built is that strong, persistent branding is actually, you know, even for very, very well advertised brands, really important in actually driving results for them. And then this is inside of a highly engaged format. So I think this idea that brands have currency in the world and they culturally mean something to people, I certainly buy into that.
Yeah.
You know, I might not, you know, drink a certain beer, but I know what it's associated with, right? I might drive a certain car, but I have an idea of who's supposed to drive that car. And that's half the fun of driving that car for the person that is. It's because I know what it means, right? And so I think that's very real, but I don't think that needs to be sacrificed to be relevant, right? You might want to give me a different message than someone that's truly in market for that. I might just need to know about the brand and what it means, and that person might need to be sold on the feature. I just think it's different. You still want to be relevant. There's still an amount of personalization and advertising that is going to help you break through. But the idea that you need to have a strong, persistent, consistent brand that has cultural meaning and cachet, I think is very real.
Great.
Yeah, that relevance is the key. We have a client who says, my audience is anyone who has a mouth. Okay, that's pretty big. But when you think about, okay, how do you create relevance for a new generation of consumer, and how do you think about maybe elements of like where in the purchase journey they are, it can't just be one message consistently. Maybe they're missing on an opportunity for frequency. Maybe they're missing on an opportunity to sell across their whole portfolio. There has to be other ways that a level of personalization may not be 100 segments, but looking at it from the lens of 2 or 3, it'll drive the business forward.
So at minimum, it's yes and, not either or.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And.
Cool. I love yes and, by the way. All right, we have 5 minutes left. Who's got some questions out there? Anybody? Anybody want to join the discussion?
You've all hinted at the fact that measurement is broken and that we need to take it to the next level and that we need to work together to solve the problem. How do we do that? Any hint on what is really missing and how we get the industry to work together on that issue?
I assume if anyone can answer this fully cleanly, you have a new job waiting for you somewhere. but it's a very valid question, right? What's happening? How do we move past this?
I think we have to approach it from two sides, and that's, again, I feel like we're in a really unique position where we have deep publisher relationships and we're talking to them all the time, and we have a lot of deep advertiser and agency relationships and we're talking to them. What's nice is that we all kind of want the same things.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's consistency on both sides. So it's unfortunate, but I think we just need more of that to come together, and we need solutions that scale across. And that is not easy. I mean, right now, to launch anything, for example, inside of CTV, which is such an important environment, it's not one platform. It's a bunch of different devices that are all different, built on different code bases. It's not simple. So I don't think it's because there's a lack of wanting to do it. I think it's because there are actually some real technical and structural impediments. And then I think it's because, to your point earlier, some conversations have been siloed for a long time that shouldn't have been. That's my opinion.
And I'd say the duopoly has been a really galvanizing force for bringing together people at other ends of the table together to say, we've got to fix this. We have to fix this if we really do believe in premium content and build out video. And so you see all the network heads at the table thinking about innovation, talking amongst each other about measurement. You see what you guys are launching as well. It could be a solve. So agreed, there's no loss of appetite and willingness to. And maybe that was the spark that helped say, you know what, enough's enough. Let's figure out how do we keep this busy healthy.
And I think it goes back to the purchasing organization as well, because I think if that's how the agencies are measured, if that's how the media is used to be measured, then we have to change that conversation with them as well. And again, once you actually give them what a potential solution is or areas that you need to explore, I think at least what we found is that they're much more open to that.
How do you drive cultural change within your organizations? Because everybody believes that you need a certain amount of TRPs. How do you change that across all of your organizations?
Great question.
You
Start
learn
exactly
that.
I'll take that one. Thanks, Scott. I think we have to. I think for starters, I think we have to understand that TRPs is not a strategy. We actually have to have a very thought-through media strategy about how do we want to reach people and where and in what manner and what kind of impactful way. So I think that if you're going to have a more kind of general mass approach, there is a role for that, but it's not the only strategy. You have to have a fully cross-channel communication in order to do that. And again, I go back to the point, I think it was incredibly sobering to see that people are not watching our content. And to actually put that in front of a lot of people at the table and to say, no one is watching this, we have to change what we're doing, it shifted a lot of mindsets. I think culturally for a large Japanese manufacturer, not always the easiest, but again, I think once you can kind of have some of those provocative things and you can actually back it up with data, it's starting to change.
It's let data tell the story, right? And have those proof points and really be sharing constantly your learnings. And sometimes in big companies, it's the shame factor of this division is doing something interesting and they shame everyone else into spending a little more. So healthy competition with it is actually good.
Shame is the strategy.
Nothing wrong with that. But I think also, I mean, sometimes we get so wrapped up in the media jargon, and there's a great sort of brilliance in just thinking as a human would think, you know what I mean? And yes, there's a really great case to be made for data, but from a cultural standpoint, you know, I think sometimes we drink our own Kool-Aid, and it's just great to step out of just take a giant step back and view it as what, you know, not everybody, I mean, this is going to come as a shock, not everybody wants to see ads every second of every single day. I mean, they just don't. That puts a lot of pressure on us, but I think it makes us better at the same time. But sometimes some of the most brilliant thoughts as it relates to media or messaging have come from moments where just sort of like, you know, there's a time and a place and a way to tell a story that is relevant for that moment versus at other times. Like a human.
Like a human.
Like a human.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm getting the hook, so we will end on thinking like humans.
Great.
Thank you to this panel.